Good evening again.
Good evening.
Today is Friday of the 32nd week in ordinary time. So one would ask, why are we celebrating a Mass in honor of St. Martin de Porres? Well, very appropriately, the Society of St. Martin de Porres here would celebrate such a Mass in honor of their patron saint. We celebrated the feast of St. Martin de Porres on November the 3rd. Perhaps some of you didn't make it to daily Mass on that day that we celebrated the feast of St. Martin de Porres. So it is a good thing to celebrate this great saint. And I think it's always a good thing to go back and kind of revisit the personhood and the character of such a saint, St. Martin de Porres. Now, all of us might be familiar in general with St. Martin de Porres and his biography. But of course, from time to time, we know that we tend to forget those little tidbits about these wonderful saints. St. Martin himself being a very popular and great saint. We tend to forget that, for example, that Martin de Porres was born the illegitimate son, of a Panamanian woman and a Spanish nobleman. We tend to forget that, his baptism, on his baptism, it states that father was unknown. We tend to forget that, the cruel term that Martin dealt with in his life was half-breed, sometimes called a war souvenir. We tend to forget that Martin could have grown up a very bitter young man because of his situation and because of the fact that he was indeed an illegitimate child, but he didn't. We seem to forget that, Martin de Porres, at the age of 12 years old, went into, an apprenticeship and studied medicine and becoming a medical assistant and barbering at the age of 12. His mother farmed him out of sorts, or he was apprenticed out to learn that trade. We probably tend to forget that Martin entered religious life as a lay brother because he was not deemed important enough socially and because of his background to enter as a candidate as a brother or a priest. Now, depending upon what church historian you read, some will say, that he entered as a lay associate or a lay brother because it was his choice. He felt unworthy. There are other church historians that tell us he entered because he was not considered a legitimate candidate for the Dominicans at the time. He took the menial jobs in the monastery when he entered. And yet, it is Martin who will shine. It is Martin de Porres, that God is going to choose to be the bearer of a message that people will listen to in his time and day. I always think that God has a real sense of humor because he always seems to choose those unlikely persons to bear his message loudly, faithfully, and clearly that causes people to stop and take note. Martin de Porres was such a person. We certainly don't forget, I think, that we hear about his ability to bilocate. I think we all kind of remember they had that ability to be in two places at one time. A very special gift of God. But we do tend to forget that the hallmark of Martin's life was charity and fighting racism and injustice. It is no wonder that he was labeled St. Martin of Charity. I think any organization that would take St. Martin as their patron saint ought to first and foremost be about charity. We know about all of the good works that St. Martin did, establishing an orphanage, feeding the hungry and the poor. We know about his, serving the slaves that came in from Africa. And yet we tend to de-emphasize, I think, the fact that wherever St. Martin saw racism and injustice, he tried to do something about it as best he could. And I think that's important. It's important to remember that this great saint, St. Martin de Porres, had a knack for charity and had a penchant for justice and fighting racism, even in his day, in the late 16th and the early 17th century. That was his drum, if you will. That was his call. Wherever he was, he wanted to be charitable, to make sure that he could at least do something about the unfortunate, the poor, the downtrodden, that he could help those out as best he could, and that he would speak to and challenge injustice wherever he saw it. I think it's important for this organization to remember those two key points. That first and foremost, their patron saint, St. Martin de Porres, was about charity. And he was about doing something when he was faced with injustice. And so as we continue with this Mass this evening, we should all be mindful of St. Martin's qualities, many though they were. The greatest of them was that he had a penchant for being charitable to all that he ran across. And he fought injustice wherever it raised its head. God bless you.